The quiet moment before the storm. The evening sun cast a soft golden glow over the garden as Sundar Pichai walked slowly along the narrow stone path. His hands were tucked gently into his pockets, his mind heavy with thoughts he rarely shared. Outside, the world saw him as a calm leader, a man who carried great responsibility with ease. But inside he was a father about to watch his daughter face something that no amount of power, money, or influence could protect her from. It wasn't a matter of technology or strategy. It was something far more personal, something every parent fears in silence. His daughter, Ananya, had always been quiet and thoughtful, a girl who found joy in the smallest things. She loved to read under the trees, paint her emotions in soft colors, and dream of a world where kindness mattered more than status. She had grown up seeing her father work tirelessly, but also seeing the values he held close: respect, humility, and compassion. She never boasted about who her father was. In fact, she avoided the spotlight completely. For her, being accepted for who she was mattered far more than being known as the daughter of a famous man. That night, as the stars began to appear one by one, Sundar noticed that she was sitting quietly on the porch, staring at the sky with an expression he had not seen before. Her eyes, usually bright with curiosity, were filled with doubt and uncertainty. He walked over, sat beside her, and waited. He had learned that sometimes silence speaks more than words. After a long pause, she finally whispered, "Papa, what if they don't choose me?" Those simple words hit him harder than any difficult decision he had ever made in his professional life. She had applied for a student leadership program at her school, a program she had dreamed about for months. It wasn't about winning a title. It was about being part of something meaningful, about contributing, about proving to herself that she could stand on her own. Sundar smiled softly, trying to comfort her. "You've worked so hard, Ananya. Whatever happens, I'm proud of you." But deep inside, he could feel the storm that might come if rejection found its way to her heart. The next morning, the school auditorium was buzzing with excitement. Students filled the seats, teachers stood proudly near the stage, and banners announcing the leadership program fluttered in the air. Ananya sat among the candidates, her hands tightly clasped together. Sundar watched from a distance, blending into the crowd like any other parent. He didn't want anyone to treat her differently because of who he was. He wanted her to walk her own path. As the selection panel began to call names, cheers echoed through the hall. One by one, students stepped onto the stage, their faces shining with joy. Then came the final names. Sundar's heart began to beat faster, not for himself, but for her. The panelists took a deep breath and announced the last selection. The auditorium fell silent for a moment. Then applause broke out. But it wasn't for Ananya. Her name hadn't been called. She sat still, her smile frozen, her eyes blinking rapidly as if trying to understand what had just happened. It was a quiet, invisible heartbreak. No one mocked her. No one said anything cruel. But the silence around her carried a weight she had never felt before. Sundar watched as she lowered her head, her shoulders slightly trembling. In that moment, he wasn't the CEO of a global company. He was just a father watching his daughter face rejection for the first time. When the ceremony ended, she walked out slowly, avoiding everyone's eyes. Sundar followed her quietly until they reached the parking lot. There, away from the noise, she finally let out the tears she had been holding back. "I thought I had a chance," she whispered. "I tried so hard, Papa." He knelt beside her, holding her shoulders gently. "You did everything right," he said softly. "Sometimes, even when we give our best, things don't go the way we hope. But this moment will not define you. What you do next will." Little did either of them know, this moment would soon set in motion a chain of events that would touch lives far beyond that auditorium. Rejection would not be the end. It would be the spark that would reveal the true power of kindness and resilience. Sundar stood up, looking at the quiet sky above, his mind already thinking of a way to turn this pain into something beautiful, not through power, not through influence, but through humanity. As the car drove away, Ananya rested her head against the window, watching the city lights blur past. Inside her, a quiet question began to grow. Am I not good enough? And Sundar knew. This was only the beginning of a journey that would test both of them in ways they never imagined. A seed of doubt, a spark of resolve the morning after the announcement felt heavier than usual. The sun rose softly, casting a pale light through the curtains of Ananya's room. She sat at her study table, staring blankly at the leadership program flyer she had once looked at with excitement. The edges of the paper were now slightly crumpled, a silent reflection of how fragile dreams can feel after rejection. Outside, the city was waking up, people rushing to work and school. But inside her heart, everything was still. She felt a strange mix of embarrassment and sadness, not because others had mocked her, but because she had believed in something so deeply and it had slipped away. Sundar knocked gently on her door and walked in with his usual calmness. He placed a warm cup of tea beside her, the steam rising between them like a quiet bridge. He didn't give her a lecture or offer false hope. Instead, he sat down on the floor beside her chair, looking up at her with patient eyes. I know it hurts, he said softly. But sometimes when something doesn't work out, it's not a door closing. It's a door we didn't know existed waiting to be opened. She didn't respond, but his words lingered in the room like soft echoes that refused to fade. Later that day, as she walked through the school corridors, whispers floated in the air. No one was being cruel, but she could feel the way people looked at her. Some were sympathetic, others indifferent. But what hurt most was that a few acted as if nothing had happened at all. It made her feel invisible, like her efforts hadn't mattered. She passed by the notice board where the selected names were pinned proudly. Students were already planning their first activities, their laughter echoing down the hallway. She looked at the board once, took a deep breath, and walked away. But deep inside, a quiet seed of doubt had started to grow. Maybe she wasn't meant for leadership. Maybe she had aimed too high. Meanwhile, Sundar sat in his office later that evening, surrounded by reports and screens. But his mind was far from work. He kept thinking about his daughter's expression, the silent ache behind her brave face. He remembered his own childhood, the times he had faced rejection and felt small. Back then, he didn't have anyone to open new doors for him. He had to find them himself. He leaned back in his chair and thought carefully. As a leader, he had always believed that failure is not the end, but a lesson. As a father, he knew this was his moment to guide her without taking away her journey. A few days later, the school announced a new community initiative, a student-led project to support children from underprivileged backgrounds through weekend learning sessions. It wasn't part of the leadership program, just an open invitation for volunteers. Most students overlooked it, focusing instead on the glamorous leadership activities. But when Ananya saw the small poster taped near the library, something inside her stirred. It wasn't about titles or stages. It was about helping, about being part of something meaningful. She stood there for a long time, reading the details over and over, as if the poster was quietly calling her name. That evening, at dinner, she hesitated before speaking. "Papa," she said slowly, "there's this community project at school. It's small, but maybe I can help." Sundar's eyes softened, not because she was doing something big, but because he saw a spark returning to her voice. "You should," he replied warmly. "Great journeys often start quietly." She nodded, still unsure but willing to try. It wasn't confidence yet, but it was a step. The first weekend, she arrived at the community center feeling nervous. The room was simple, a few tables, some chairs, and walls covered with colorful drawings made by children. A handful of students showed up, mostly the ones who didn't make it into the leadership program either. The children greeted them shyly, holding their worn notebooks. As she sat down with a little girl struggling to read, something shifted inside her. The girl's eyes lit up every time she got a word right. There was no competition here, no stage, no applause, just pure connection. Week after week she returned, slowly building trust with the children. They began to wait eagerly for her. One boy, who had refused to speak on the first day, started reading aloud confidently by the third week. A girl who had struggled with math started drawing numbers on the board with joy. Their small victories felt more meaningful than any title. Ananya found herself smiling again, genuinely. Not because she had something to prove, but because she had found something to give. Sundar noticed the change in her. She came home tired, but with a light in her eyes he hadn't seen in weeks. One night, as they sat on the porch together, she told him stories about the children, their dreams, their struggles, their laughter. He listened silently, proud not of her achievements but of her growing heart. He knew she was healing, but he also sensed something bigger was coming. What she didn't know was that the leadership program students were planning a large event at the school, and they needed volunteers. This event would bring her face to face with those who had been chosen instead of her. And within that moment, life would give her a choice: to walk away or to rise with quiet strength. The crossroads of pride and purpose, the weeks passed quietly, but inside the school walls, change was brewing. The leadership students, busy planning their grand annual cultural event, began putting up posters across the corridors. Bright colors, bold designs, and promises of something unforgettable covered every wall. It was the biggest event of the school year, the kind of platform where reputations were built and celebrated. For the chosen leaders, it was a chance to shine. For the rest, it was usually a time to watch from the shadows. Ananya walked past the posters each day, a gentle mix of admiration and distance in her eyes. She wasn't bitter anymore, but the wound of that day still lingered deep inside, like a scar hidden beneath layers of quiet strength. One afternoon, as she finished her volunteer session at the community center, she found her teacher waiting at the gate. "Ananya," the teacher said kindly, "the leadership team is looking for volunteers to help with the cultural event. They need someone responsible to manage the community outreach part. Would you be interested?" Ananya froze. The words hit her unexpectedly. The very same program that had rejected her now wanted her help. For a moment, pride whispered in her ear, a quiet urge to walk away, to prove that they had missed their chance. But then another voice, softer yet stronger, rose within her. It reminded her of the children who had started believing in her. She took a deep breath and nodded slowly. "Yes, I'll help," she said. The first meeting with the leadership team was tense. She entered the room and felt the weight of eyes turning toward her. Some smiled politely. Others seemed surprised to see her there. The team leader, a confident boy who had been chosen instead of her, greeted her with formality. "Thanks for joining us, Ananya. We really need someone to handle the community outreach. It's not the most glamorous part of the event, but it's important." His tone was polite, but beneath it, she could sense the subtle layers. This was a task given because no one else wanted it. But instead of shrinking, she straightened her shoulders and smiled gently. "I'll do my best," she replied. As the days went by, she immersed herself in the work. While others focused on decorations, performances, and publicity, she spent hours visiting neighborhoods, talking to parents, inviting families who often felt excluded from such events. She arranged small transportation options for children from nearby communities, coordinated schedules, and ensured everyone felt welcome. It was tiring and often thankless. Few noticed what she was doing. But deep inside, she wasn't doing it for recognition. She was doing it because it mattered. One evening, after a long day of planning, she stayed behind in the auditorium to check seating arrangements for the guests. The hall was empty, echoing with faint sounds of distant chatter. As she stood there alone, the team leader walked in. "You're still here?" he asked, surprised. She nodded, adjusting a row of chairs. "Just making sure everything's ready," she said. He watched her for a moment, then sighed. "To be honest, when they suggested your name for outreach, I didn't think you'd take it seriously. But you've done more than any of us expected." His voice wasn't mocking. It carried a quiet respect. For the first time, she saw a different side of him, stripped of competition. Meanwhile, Sundar watched all of this from a distance. He would often pick her up late in the evening, seeing her tired yet determined face. One night, as they drove home under the soft city lights, she leaned against the seat, exhausted. "Papa," she said quietly, "I'm not on the stage. I'm not leading the event, but I feel like I'm part of something bigger." He glanced at her with gentle pride. "True leadership isn't about standing in front of people," he said softly. "It's about standing for something meaningful, and you're doing exactly that." His words wrapped around her like a warm blanket on a cold night. As the event day approached, unexpected challenges began to arise. The decorations team ran into problems with last-minute deliveries. The performers needed new sound arrangements, and the outreach team, her team, faced transportation issues for the children they had promised to bring. If they failed, many families wouldn't make it to the event, and their trust would be broken. The leadership team began to panic. Meetings grew tense, voices were raised, and the smooth facade started to crack. In that chaos, all eyes turned to her. Not because she had a title, but because, somehow, she had become the steady voice everyone listened to. She didn't have authority, but she had something far more powerful: calmness under pressure. She divided tasks quickly, made calls, and rallied students who weren't part of any team to help. Sundar, seeing her stressed that evening, offered quiet support without stepping in. "Do what you can," he told her. "You don't have to fix everything, just give your best." But deep inside, he saw the flicker of something he had always believed in: resilience growing quietly, like a flame that refuses to go out in the wind. On the night before the event, as she sat alone in her room surrounded by checklists, she felt a mix of fear and determination. She wasn't on the stage, she wasn't holding a microphone, but tomorrow everything she had worked for would either come together or fall apart. And for the first time, she realized something important. Leadership isn't given. It's earned through quiet actions that speak louder than any title. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "I can do this." What she didn't know was that the next day would bring an unexpected twist, one that would not only test her strength but also change the way everyone saw her, including those who once overlooked her. The day everything almost fell apart. The morning of the event arrived like a quiet drum roll beneath the surface of the school. The sun was barely up, but the campus was already alive with movement. Students hurried in every direction, carrying decorations, testing microphones, adjusting lights, and rehearsing last-minute lines. The air was filled with excitement and nerves, like a fragile balloon ready to burst. Ananya arrived early, her backpack heavy with papers, checklists, and a small water bottle she kept forgetting to drink from. She walked through the auditorium slowly, taking it all in. The stage lights were being tested, beams of warm yellow slicing through the dim hall like spotlights searching for something. It felt bigger than anything she had ever been part of. She gathered her small outreach team in the corner of the school courtyard. Their task was simple but crucial: bring in the children and families from the nearby communities and make sure they were seated comfortably before the program began. She had spent weeks organizing this, making promises to families who had trusted her. For many of them, it was the first time they were attending something like this. They had dressed carefully, some wearing their best clothes, their faces glowing with quiet anticipation. Everything depended on the buses arriving on time and the team coordinating smoothly. But as the clock ticked closer to the event's start, her phone buzzed with a message that made her heart stop. One of the drivers had called in sick unexpectedly, and the backup driver was stuck in traffic far across the city. One of the buses carrying dozens of children was delayed indefinitely. Without that bus, nearly half the families wouldn't make it to the event. Panic spread through her team like a sudden gust of wind knocking over fragile plans. Students began talking over each other, offering half-formed solutions. Some said they should just leave without the last group to keep the schedule intact. Others suggested they inform the leadership team and cancel that part altogether. Ananya stood in the middle of the chaos, her hands trembling slightly. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears. This was the moment that could undo everything she had built over the past weeks. She took a deep breath, remembering her father's words. Leadership isn't about standing in front. It's about standing for something. She quickly assessed the situation, dividing the smaller group into two teams. One team would escort the families who had already arrived and settle them in the auditorium, making sure they felt welcome. The other team, led by her, would find a way to reach the stranded group. She called her father, explaining the situation in short, hurried sentences. Without a second thought, Sundar said, "I'm on my way." Within minutes, he arrived in his car. Together they mapped out a quick route, and with the help of two parents who owned vans, they created an improvised carpool system. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. As they drove through the streets, the clock kept ticking. The event was starting in less than an hour. In the back seats, children chattered nervously, clutching small hand-drawn posters they had made for the event. Some were scared they would miss their moment. Ananya kept reassuring them gently, even as fear twisted inside her. When they finally reached the school, the sight of the auditorium bursting with energy gave her a surge of adrenaline. Volunteers rushed to help them inside. The families took their seats just as the opening music began to play. She exhaled deeply, her hands still shaking, but this time from relief. Inside, the leadership team was unaware of the storm that had just passed. They were focused on the stage, the lights, the speeches. But the teacher in charge had noticed everything. She quietly approached Ananya backstage and placed a hand on her shoulder. "I saw what you did," she whispered. "That was real leadership." Ananya looked at her, tired but glowing in a way that words couldn't describe. She didn't need applause. The sight of the children laughing in their seats was enough. As the program unfolded, something unexpected happened. One of the key performers, a leadership student who was supposed to deliver the closing speech, suddenly fell ill. Backstage became a whirlwind of whispers and urgent discussions. The team leader approached Ananya, desperation in his eyes. "We need someone to fill in," he said. "You know the outreach story better than anyone. Would you do it?" For a moment, the world around her went silent. Her heart raced. She had spent weeks working behind the scenes, never once imagining herself standing under those bright lights. Fear and doubt battled inside her. What if she made a mistake? What if her voice shook? She looked at the faces of the children, the families who had trusted her, and then at the team who now looked to her not as a volunteer but as someone capable. Something inside her shifted. All those quiet choices, those nights spent working without recognition, had led to this exact moment. She nodded slowly. "I'll do it," she said. Backstage, as she held the microphone for the first time, her hands felt cold, but her heart burned with a calm fire. Sundar stood at the very back of the auditorium, unseen among the crowd, his eyes fixed on her. He didn't move, didn't speak. He simply watched his daughter take a step onto a stage she had once believed she didn't belong to. The lights flooded her face, the audience grew silent, and she stood there, not as the daughter of someone powerful, not as a rejected candidate, but as herself. What she didn't know was that the speech she was about to give would not only change the tone of the entire event, but would also touch hearts in a way no one had expected. The voice that changed the room, the spotlight bathed the stage in warm light as Ananya stepped forward. For a brief second, the world seemed to hold its breath. The chatter faded, the music stopped, and every pair of eyes in the auditorium turned toward her. She could feel the weight of that silence pressing gently against her chest, like the quiet before a storm. The microphone felt heavier than it looked. Her fingers curled around it tightly, and she took a slow, shaky breath. She remembered that day on the porch weeks ago when she had whispered to her father, "What if they don't choose me?" Now here she was, chosen not by a panel, not by titles, but by life itself. She began softly, her voice trembling just enough to reveal her heart. "Good evening," she said. "I wasn't supposed to be standing here tonight. In fact, a few weeks ago, I believed my story had ended before it began." A ripple of curiosity spread through the audience. Students who barely noticed her before now leaned forward. The leadership team members exchanged quiet glances. Her honesty cut through the usual polished speeches they were used to hearing. She continued, her voice growing steadier with each word. "I applied for the leadership program and didn't get selected. It hurt. It made me doubt myself. But then something happened. I found a place where I could give, even if no one was watching." She told them about the community project, the children she had met, and how their small victories had changed her perspective. She didn't use grand words. She didn't try to impress. She simply spoke from the heart. Her voice carried the weight of lived experience, the quiet pain of rejection, the silent strength of persistence, and the gentle power of kindness. As she spoke about the morning's transportation crisis, about how families and students had come together to solve it, her words painted a vivid picture of teamwork beyond titles. The audience listened in absolute stillness. Even the students who once dismissed her found themselves nodding unconsciously, touched by something real. In the back of the hall, Sundar stood like a quiet shadow, watching his daughter command a room without raising her voice. His heart swelled, not with pride in her achievement, but with respect for her journey. He had always believed that leadership is not about power, but about the courage to stand up when no one expects you to. And now, he saw that truth reflected in her eyes, glowing softly under the stage lights. As she reached the end of her speech, she paused, letting the silence settle again. "Sometimes," she said softly, "rejection isn't the end. It's just life's way of redirecting us towards something more meaningful. I didn't get the title, but I found something far greater. The chance to make a difference. And maybe that's what true leadership is." Her last words lingered in the air like gentle music. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then slowly applause began to rise. At first from the children sitting in the front rows, their small hands clapping eagerly. Then from the families, then from the leadership team, and finally from the entire hall. The sound grew until it filled every corner of the auditorium like a wave breaking against the shore. Backstage, as she stepped off the stage, the team leader approached her with a sincerity she hadn't seen before. "Ananya," he said, his voice low but genuine, "that was incredible. You made everyone feel something real. You led us today." His words weren't rehearsed or polite. They came from a place of humbled respect. For the first time, she saw not competition in his eyes, but camaraderie. The teacher in charge gathered the team together after the event ended, her face glowing with pride. "Today wasn't just a successful event," she said. "It was a reminder of what leadership truly means. Titles may open doors, but heart keeps them open." Everyone nodded, but their eyes kept drifting toward Ananya. She didn't stand at the center of the group, didn't raise her hands in celebration. She simply smiled, tired but fulfilled, her heart steady and light. Later that night, after the crowds had left and the lights had dimmed, Sundar and Ananya sat on the empty stage together. The hall was quiet except for the faint hum of distant city sounds. He looked at her, his eyes soft and shining. "You didn't just give a speech," he said gently. "You gave them something to feel. That's rare." She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder, the exhaustion of the day finally settling in. "I was scared," she whispered. "But I didn't want to let anyone down." He smiled. "Courage doesn't mean you're not scared," he replied. "It means you kept going anyway." But as they sat there in that peaceful moment, neither of them knew that the ripple of her words had already begun to spread far beyond that hall. A parent had recorded her entire speech on their phone and shared it online. By the next morning, what she said on that stage would reach thousands of people, including some who had underestimated her the most. When kindness echoed beyond the room, the night after the event felt strangely quiet. Ananya lay in bed, her body tired but her heart steady, replaying every moment on that stage like scenes from a distant dream. She didn't expect anything more to come from it. For her, the day had been enough. She had stood in a place she once thought was out of reach, not to prove a point, but to share her truth. Outside her room, the world was slowly beginning to take notice of something she had not planned at all. A parent who had attended the event had uploaded the video of her speech to a community platform. The video, raw and unpolished, showed a young girl standing under bright lights, speaking softly but with a sincerity that pierced through screens. By midnight, messages began trickling in. By morning, the trickle became a wave. At breakfast, Sundar sat reading messages on his phone with an expression that mixed surprise and quiet pride. "Ananya," he said softly, "I think you should see this." She walked over, still in her pajamas, and looked at the screen. The video of her speech had spread rapidly overnight. People from different schools, cities, and even countries were commenting. Some shared their own stories of rejection and resilience. Others simply thanked her for her honesty. Her words had traveled far beyond the walls of her school, reaching people who needed to hear them. She blinked at the screen in disbelief. "I didn't expect this," she whispered. Sundar smiled. "The most powerful things are often the ones we don't plan." When she arrived at school that day, the atmosphere was different. Students who had once walked past her without a glance now greeted her with warm smiles. Some stopped her in the hallway to thank her for her speech. Even members of the leadership team approached her, not as distant achievers, but as equals. The team leader walked up to her in the courtyard, his tone humble and genuine. "Your words reached more people than any of us ever could," he said. "We want you to be part of the core team for next year, not because of what happened on stage, but because of what you bring to all of us." She looked at him, surprised but calm, and simply nodded. She didn't need a title anymore to feel worthy. But this time the invitation came not as charity, but as respect earned through action. Teachers began sharing her story in classes, using her journey as an example of how leadership can emerge in unexpected ways. Her community project saw a surge of new volunteers inspired by her message. Parents who had watched her speech reached out to support the children she had been helping. What began as a small act of resilience had turned into a movement of kindness, slowly weaving itself into the fabric of the school's culture. She no longer felt like someone standing outside looking in. She had quietly become a bridge between worlds, between privilege and humility, between rejection and purpose. One afternoon, as she walked through the community center where it had all begun, a little girl ran up to her holding a worn notebook tightly. "I saw you on my brother's phone," the girl said with a shy smile. "You were on the stage. I told him you'd teach me reading." Ananya knelt down, her eyes soft. "Yes, and I will keep teaching you," she replied. In that moment, she realized something profound. The speech, the recognition, the attention, they were meaningful, but this quiet connection was where everything had started. It reminded her that true impact isn't measured in views or applause. It's felt in the lives we touch when no one is watching. Sundar watched her from the doorway, his heart full but silent. He had seen her journey from the first moment of doubt on that quiet porch to this moment of grounded strength. He hadn't interfered. He hadn't used his influence. He had simply stood beside her as she found her own way. That night, as they sat together under the stars once again, he said, "Do you remember the night you asked me, 'What if they don't choose me?'" She nodded, smiling softly. "They didn't," she said, "but I chose myself." Sundar's eyes glistened, not with tears of sadness, but with the kind of emotion that only a parent who has watched their child rise can feel. "And that," he whispered, "is the greatest choice you'll ever make." Weeks later, during the school's end-of-year assembly, the principal called her to the stage unexpectedly. The auditorium was filled with students, teachers, and parents. She walked up, unsure of what to expect. The principal spoke gently into the microphone. "Sometimes leadership is not appointed. Sometimes it grows quietly among us, changing lives without seeking attention. Today we honor a student who reminded us what true leadership looks like." The hall erupted in applause as she stood there, not as someone who had been chosen by others, but as someone who had become a symbol of kindness and resilience through her actions. She looked out into the audience and saw the children from the community center sitting proudly in the front row. She saw the leadership team members smiling genuinely, and at the very back she saw her father standing as he always had, quietly with steady eyes that held no expectations, only belief. In that moment she understood something deeply. Rejection had been a gift in disguise. It had forced her to find her own path, to lead not through titles but through compassion. And kindness, once planted, had grown far beyond anything she could have imagined.